Hello, fellow YouTubers. This is DVD Collector 1986 here with a new video for you. I'm going to be reviewing the movie Logan. This is kind of a long overdue review, but let's get into it. I did a written review that I posted on my Facebook page, but I didn't feel that I liked that review, but I didn't feel that it brought justice to how I really felt about this movie. So now that my webcam is working again, I'm going to review this movie. So, um, Logan takes place in the year 20, I think it's 20, 2029. Um, I don't remember the exact year, so forgive me, but it's in the future, but a not too distant future. And the first thing we notice is Logan Wolverine is older. Um, he wakes up in the back of his limousine drunk. He's an Uber driver, by the way. He drives back and forth between El Paso and El Paso, Texas, and Mexico, because he actually lives in Mexico, out in the middle of the desert in an old, what used to be an old smelting factory that's abandoned. And so he wakes up, and there's an El Paso street gang trying to strip the rims off the tires of his car. The first thing you notice when this movie begins is when Logan gets out of the limousine. Um, he's limping around. He staggers. Something just isn't right. It's not quite the Hugh Jackman Wolverine that we remember from previous films. And what ends up happening is he basically tells the street gang, guys, you really don't want to do this, et cetera, et cetera. And um, they shoot him, and he goes down. Bam. And you notice that it takes him a while to get back up. And basically, what I'm getting at is we figure out that his healing factor is quite diminished. It doesn't work the way that it used to. It takes him much longer to heal from injuries. And that's why when he told those guys, you don't want to do this, he would fight him if he had to, but he didn't want to if he didn't have to do it, because he knew that if he got in a fight with them, that it was going to hurt, that he wouldn't heal as quickly. So from the get go, that's the Logan that we now in this that's in this movie. He's older, he's tired, he's broken down. Even when he does his claws, when he fights the street gang, one of the three claws that comes out of one of his hands, one of the claws doesn't come out all the way. It comes out like halfway. So he's messed up. Um, and and then on top of that, we find out that he drives back over into Mexico afterwards, and he has at this smelting plant. He lives with Caliban, who's a mutant that was in the movie X-Men Apocalypse, and Caliban is a mutant that can track other mutants. And basically, Caliban is helping Logan take care of Charles, Professor X. Professor X is now like 90 years old in this movie. He has cataracts in one of his eyes, and he, like I said, is extremely old, and he has Alzheimer's and dementia, and he also suffers from seizures pretty often. And problem is, if you know anything about Professor X from the older X-Men movies, when he was in his prime, he could control people's minds, read their thoughts, make them freeze in place, we've seen the stuff that he can do in the previous films. Well, he still has that ability, but imagine having the world's strongest brain, and now when you have seizures and dementia, you can't control it anymore. He's become a danger to those around him. And um, so Logan's all beat up, like I said, he's got his problems. And then he's taking care of an ailing Professor X. And Professor X sometimes doesn't remember who Logan is at certain times. And other times, he is very coherent and he does know what's going on, but other times he doesn't. So, um, and um, then as the movie goes on, they don't reveal it outright, but they, through clues and connecting the dots, as the movie goes on, you figure out that um, that basically that a year before uh, something happened uh, where Professor X had, his ailment that he currently has. He was at the mansion with the other X Men, and he had a seizure, and he basically accidentally killed all the other X Men. And by all the other X Men, I mean Beast, Jean Grey, Cyclops, um, Storm, um, what's her name, Rogue. Basically, all the other X Men. That's the big reveal, and this doesn't ruin the movie. But the big reveal is all the X Men are dead except for Caliban. He was never really an X Men, but most of the mutants are dead. So now you just have Caliban, Wolverine, and you have Professor X. And the reason they're living in Mexico on the edge of the world is so that Logan can hide Charles and protect him from the world because he doesn't want Charles to be captured. And the government is going around rounding up mutants and just systematically slaughtering them. Kind of sounds like something Hitler did back in World War II. That's a parallel. If you know anything about history, um, that's a parallel that's drawn in this film. The government is just rounding up a particular group of people and just killing them off. Um, so like I said, a parallel in the film. But what I like about this movie is it's not your typical superhero film. Um, there's not like all these different characters and all these different mutants that have to have their character moment, like Storm with her lightning and Cyclops with his laser vision, or his vision. Um, you know, Beast doing his thing, and woohoo, and there's like explosions and CGI and all this crap. This movie's not like that at all. Essentially, what Logan is a superhero film for people who don't particularly may not like superhero films. Even if you don't like superhero films, you'll still love this movie. It reminded me a lot of Thelma and Louise. Um, it reminded me of Unforgiven, the Clint Eastwood movie. Um, it reminded me of Leon the Professional. That's a really good vigilante movie. Uh, it reminded me of a bunch of movies, but essentially it's a road movie because what ends up happening is there's this little girl that shows up, played by an actress named Daphne Keene, I believe, and we find out that the government has been cloning, well, not cloning, but but genetically engineering uh, genetically modified mutants and training them to be soldiers. Well, the mutants start out as children because they're embryos, and they were put into the wombs of Mexican girls in Mexico, and then they're born, and then they raised them and trained them to be soldiers. Well, basically, um, the girl that's played by Daphne Keene is one of those mutants, but she was cloned and artificially genetically created using Wolverine's DNA. So she has the claws and whatnot. Um, and basically, like I said, the government is going around killing all mutants. And it ends up being that she ends up on Logan's doorstep. And Logan and Charles and Caliban have to protect this girl. And the whole movie, they're on the run from a shadowy group of um, badass, tough as nails amputee warriors called the Reavers. And the Reavers are on their tail constantly. They can't stay in any one place very long. So, like I said, that's where the Thelma and Louise um, element kind of comes in. They're constantly on the run. It's a road movie, and they stop somewhere. They eat. They get washed up. They get some sleep. But then here the bad guys that are after them are here. They show up and they have to run off again. And the whole movie, the tension just ratchets up and ratchets up and ratchets, and you know that something's gonna, all of their paths are gonna collide at some point, which is gonna be, of course, towards the end of the movie. But the this movie just the tension just keeps ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up, and um, it's one of those movies where you're watching it and you're like, you think you know what's gonna happen, but then something totally different than what you expected happens. Um, this movie is very emotional. It's very dark, gritty, grounded in reality. Um, it's essentially taking superheroes and putting them in real life, real world situations. If you were to take superheroes and put them in real life situations, what would that be like? That's what this movie does. And um, the Reavers are, like I said, tracking them down, always right. I mean, they're like a step behind them all the time, so they're always on the run, and they meet up with different characters along the way. There's a family that lives in a farmhouse. Something happens there. I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to ruin it. But that's one of those holy crap moments in that movie is that the farmhouse sequence. And basically, like I said, Logan is old, tired, beat up, slower. Um, he has, and the reason that he's so ill himself and beat up is that the antimantium that's bonded to his skeleton, that he wasn't born with an antimantium skeleton. His claws were originally bone, but his skeleton was fused with an antimantium, the metal. And after all these years, Logan's been alive at this point for close to 200 years. And at this point, the antimantium skeleton in his body is beginning to leach, which is causing him to be severely ill. He limps everywhere. He coughs up blood. Um, every time the claws come out, pus drips from his knuckles. And like I said, on top of everything else, his healing factor is not at all what it used to be. And so you have this old, vulnerable Wolverine that's not so invincible anymore. And the movie really gets interesting when uh, he pretty much outsmarts the Reavers. I mean, he stays ahead of them pretty well. And so finally, the bad guys, as I call them, which is the same company that made Wolverine what he is. They call them Transigen Research in this movie, but it's the same company that was at Alkali Lake. So um, they the Reavers are not very effective. So finally, there's a scientist that's the head of the lab, and he decides instead of the Reavers, he's got something better to track down Wolverine and that little girl Laura, and it's basically it's X-24, which is a clone of Wolverine, but it's Wolverine when he was young. And this particular clone has no humanity. He doesn't have the emotions or the um he doesn't care about anything. He's just the berserker rage of the old Wolverine, and he's younger. His healing factor works perfectly. He's faster, and you know that sooner or later that the old Logan and the younger clone are going to cross paths and fight. And let me tell you, they sure as heck do. Like I said, something happens at the farm. I'm not going to say what, but they end up fighting each other on the front lawn. And that is one of the most brutal, hand to hand, raw, nasty street fights you will ever see. And you see blood, guts. I mean, it's brutal. And like I said, the old Logan is slow, tired. He limps. He doesn't heal properly, and he still has to fight this younger version of himself. And um, it's just brutal. And um, oh man, that's just a wow. That scene really got me. When I watched it, it's like watching the um, Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator from Terminator 2. It's like watching that Terminator fight the liquid metal T-1000. You know the T-1000, they're both Terminators, but one is more advanced than the other. Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator is like the obsolete model, and the liquid metal guy is faster than him. Well, that's how it is in this movie. The younger Wolverine is the superior, you know, Wolverine. There's two, and the old Wolverine gets his ass kicked, basically. And, um, oof, man, it was tough to watch. But um, a lot of unexpected things happen in this film, and um, it's a pretty bleak film. And um, by the time it's over, you'll be exhausted. But it's a very good film. It's a comic book film that I think everybody should watch, and it's also proof that not all comic book movies have to be geared towards an audience with a 13-year-old's attention span. No offense to teenagers, but you can make comic book films that are geared towards adults. This movie is proof of that, and I would rate this movie 10 out of 10. And ultimately, the main villain that Logan has to fight is this younger version of himself. Now, I've heard people complain that, oh, why couldn't they have put Sabretooth in there? Why couldn't it have been you know, some other villain. Why Logan fights himself? That's kind of lame. Well, those people clearly didn't get it because this movie has a lot of like double meaning or subliminal meanings, things that represent other things. You know what I'm talking about. And in this movie, what it represented was that Logan having to face his past before he developed emotion, before he started caring about people. The original older Logan used to be just like the younger clone of himself. He was an animal, a killer straight up, and did some bad things. And now his past has come back to haunt him, and he has to face it and literally fight a younger, faster, meaner, uglier version of himself. He's coming to terms with his the dark deeds of his past. That's what that's supposed to represent. And there's a lot of hidden meanings like that throughout the movie. They reference an old Western movie from the 50s called Shane, which is kind of a parallel to what this movie is about. And like I said, they show clips from the movie Shane actually in the movie. And so you got all this stuff going on. And then all the while, the old Logan refuses to accept Laura as his um, daughter, so to speak. And the whole time, once she teams up with Logan, or Logan starts protecting her, from that point on, she does everything in her power to try to get Logan to like her, to accept her as his daughter, to get his attention. She wants him to be nice to her and to treat her like his daughter, and he won't. Because if you know anything about Wolverine through all the Wolverine films, every person that he's ever loved or cared about has either died or had something bad happen to them. So he has trouble opening up that door and showing love to people. And that's why he doesn't like to get close to people. And he actually says it at one point in the movie. He looks at Laura and he says, um, you know, bad shit happens to people that I care about. Um, that's literally what he says. And so you've got that. And it's just an amazing movie. It's got all these different layers to it. And before I close the video, I would just like to say that um, Logan is a movie that people of many different audience factions, but you'll understand what I mean in a second, but there's different groups of people that relate to this movie for different reasons, is what I'm trying to say. You've got um, Logan is an older, beat up guy, and he's taking care of a dying, ailing, older father figure. There's a lot of people nowadays with people living longer. There's a lot of people that are taking care of their parents, and their parents are elderly. There's people with Alzheimer's. People. It's rough to take care of people with those kinds of conditions. It's very difficult, and just hard on people. There's a lot of people that are in those kinds of situations. So people that are taking care of elderly, old relatives, they can relate to that. There's people that just older folks that can relate to Logan because when you get old, just like with Logan, your body doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Um, you don't heal the same way when you get an injury or you get sick. It takes you longer to recuperate. So people can relate to it because of that. Um, Also, people that have problems, children that have problems with their parents, trying to get their parents to care about them. Because there are some people that don't care about their kids in this world. And so kids that are trying to get their parents to pay attention to them, or you know, give them the time of day, um, they can relate to where the character Daphne is coming from. Or Daphne, that's the actress's name, but she's actually, her character name is Laura. They call her X-23, but people can relate to her because of that. Um, and there's people. I don't think I've met a single person in my entire life. I've not met one person that did not regret something that they did in their past. Everybody has something in their past that they're not proud of. Some people have several things from their past, but everybody has at least one thing from their past that they're not proud of, and so that's what Logan represents when he's fighting the younger version of himself. He's fighting, his the dark demons of his past are the is what the younger Logan represents. He's a physical manifestation of the bad things that Logan did in the past. So people, like I said, everybody that I know, everybody I've ever known has something in their past that they're not proud of. So people can relate to that on that basis. And then the other group of people that I have heard, I'm not a veteran myself, but I've heard through the grapevine that the other group of people that identify with this movie are combat veterans, because this movie is a metaphor, underlying subtext for PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. And when you've had, whether it be going to war, having some really close relatives die, um, or just having something really traumatic happen to you that messed you up and affected you and gave you PTSD. There's different ways of getting PTSD, but this movie deals with the underlying subtext of PTSD and what it does to people. And that's what Logan has in the movie. The old Logan has PTSD. That's why he doesn't want to get close to people, etc. And so, combat veterans with really bad PTSD and people that have PTSD for other reasons, they can also relate to that. So, it's a great movie. It has a lot to say about a lot of different things. There's a lot of hidden meanings and things in it that represent certain things. It's a very well written, very well executed, elaborate, rich character piece. And I would say it's probably I don't know if I've said this already, but to me, it's the best comic book movie that's ever been done at this point. I like this movie better than Deadpool. Uh, Thank you, Deadpool, for showing these movie studios that the world is ready for R-rated comic book movies. Because I'm really getting sick and tired of all these sissy PG-13 comic book movies. You can do comic book movies geared towards adults. It does work. This movie is proof of that. And so, the other thing I wanted to mention is that um, the ending of this movie is gonna shock you, um, because it's probably not gonna be what you're expecting. But this movie is a masterpiece, um, and I like this movie. I'm a Batman fan, but I like this movie better than any of the Batman films, and I'll tell you why. A lot of people have said that this movie can be compared to The Dark Knight, as far as like, The Dark Knight was kind of dark and gritty, realistic, like a noir detective type. Everybody has said the Dark Knight is really good, and I was one of those. I loved the Dark Knight films, but um, the problem I have with the Dark Knight is that they if you go back and watch the Dark Knight trilogy, watch all three in proper order, you'll notice that there's all these little hints and clues that are thrown in that Batman probably is going to give his life and die in the last film, the third one, because it's a trilogy. Well, they threw all these little clues in there to tease you. Oh, maybe they're going to actually kill Batman in this, because they've never done that before. And like I said, there's a scene in The Dark Knight Rises where Catwoman gets on the Bat Pod and she looks at Batman, and Batman looks at her, and she says, why are you staying back here to save the people in the city? You don't owe them anything. And, you've already given them everything. She actually says, you've already given them everything. He says to her, not everything, not yet. Which leads to me, well, is he going to die? Because he just said, not everything, meaning his life. I haven't given my life yet. So that's what they were hinting at. And then Bruce Wayne's really depressed throughout all three of those movies. He's reclusive. And it's kind of dark and grim, but you get the sense that he wants to die. Um, he keeps putting himself in these dangerous situations, beating his body up. Um, you know, he wants to die, and if he did die, then maybe in his own mind he could go and be with his parents. Because hello, he saw his parents get shot and killed right in front of him. Pretty dark stuff, right? Well, it makes sense that he would, if he gave his life at the end of the trilogy, that it would be sad that he died, but at least he'd get to go and be with his parents, who he really wanted to be with. But they teased at all this, and they never delivered on it. That's the one problem with the Dark Knight trilogy I have. I love that series of films, but Christopher Nolan, you just couldn't do it. You couldn't kill Batman, and if you did, it would have been sad, but that would have been such an epic finish to that trilogy if he had given his life for Gotham City. I mean, and they teased at it. He took the bomb over the bay, and it's like that's what they were setting up. And everybody's like, "Oh no, Batman's gonna die!" And then at the very end, they had to show that little scene where they're in the little cafe, and he goes like this. So it's like, we were gonna kill him off, but no, we decided we couldn't do it at the end, and that's why I have such a problem with those movies. Now, with that being said, Logan, I mean, this kind of will give away the ending a little bit. But let me just put it to you this way: Logan did what The Dark Knight Rises didn't have the balls to do. So that should tell you something. It's a sad movie, but it's excellent. And like I said, it is one of the best comic book movies that has ever been done. And everybody should watch this movie at least once, because a lot of people can relate to this movie for a lot of different reasons. Anyway, I've ranted on enough about this movie, like over 30 minutes, but it's a movie I love. Matter of fact, uh, if I had to do a top 5 movies of all time, right off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you what the other 4 in that lineup would be, but Logan would be in the number 1 spot. It's really that good. Yes, it's a bleak, depressing, sad movie, but I like movies that are based in reality. I always have. Saving Private Ryan, sad movie, but realistic. Um, the Alamo, uh, the remake in particular. All the Alamo defenders died. Um, and that really happened. That's reality. Um, and essentially, what they did with Logan was they took Wolverine and they put him into a very realistic situation. Um, and it's not so much how the movie ends that's so emotional. It's the journey that he takes over the course of this movie from the beginning to the end, leading up to the end. It's not the destination at the end where he ends up that's sad. It's his journey leading up to that point, which unfolds as you watch the movie. Anyway, great movie. I rate it 10 out of 10, and I think everybody should see this film. And like I said, if I had to do a top five, it would be my number one. And it probably will be my number one for a very, very long time, unless they can come up with another movie that can bump it down to maybe the number two spot in the future. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Thank you for watching. If you made it to the end, you're a trooper, and I will catch you guys next time. Thanks.